Good morning, everybody. Hi. All right. Thanks for the very nice introduction, and thanks again to LaShawn, who thanked the organizing committee for putting on this event. But I think the organizing committee was pretty much LaShawn, so I think he may deserve another round of applause for putting this together. We have a great lineup of speakers for you guys today. Somehow I am included amongst them. I think there was a typo on a program somewhere. How are my people in the back doing? Can you guys hear everything okay? All right, cool. When I was in school, I was to sit in the back row and check my phone too. That was me. So as LaShawn mentioned, I am both heavily involved in 8th Light's apprenticeship model. I've mentored somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 apprentices. Might be more, might be less. Should really celebrate the 10th one. It's a nice big round number. But I'm also overeducated. I went back to school once. Best 5 years of my life was getting my master's degree. And that means I do have a little bit to say about both how we educate developers traditionally and how we educate developers non-traditionally. Because I've worked with a lot of boot camp grads, and I know we have some boot camp students out there right now. So I want to talk to you guys about sort of your typical student. This is Jane. Jane's an 18-year-old high school graduate. She's really excited because she is going to go and pick out what she wants to do for the rest of her life. She is going to be a computer programmer. She knows it. She's tinkered with computers since pretty much she was, 3, because she had an iPad of her parents that she wouldn't let go of. If you have a 3-year-old, you know they won't let go of your iPad. So she's always liked them just a little bit more than your typical person growing up nowadays when everyone is surrounded by technology. She makes little websites for her friends, and she really wants to build stuff. She wants to be a programmer. So she does what many of us do at 18. She begins applying to beach balls on a slideshow. She begins applying to universities, right? She fills out application after application to universities at $100 a pop. This will be a recurring theme, but she doesn't know this yet. She's going to be paying a lot of fees for the rest of her life. But she starts filling out the application. She goes to every big university. Her parents help her along. They're so proud of her. She's going to go to maybe MIT or Yale or, maybe the local community college if she can't afford any of those others. But she gets in. She gets into her university of choice. She's going to be a CS student. And what does that mean? Well, it means now it's time to fill out her FAFSA. That's the Federal Application for Financial Student Aids. It's time for her to start getting student loans. Congratulations. She is going to be paying these for the rest of her life, but she's 18 and doesn't know it yet. So her first day at the university, Jane meets her advisor, right? And he wants to help, but he's met with 27 other students that day, and it's 9:30 in the morning. She says she wants to be a computer programmer someday. She wants to build websites. She wants to make web apps. She wants to make mobile apps. She wants to make video games. She wants to do all this stuff, right? She's really excited, and her advisor's really tired and hasn't had enough coffee. So he hands her a sheet and says, well, you got to get your gen ed requirements. Gen ed requirements, what does that mean? Well, you got to take English, you got to take social studies, you got to take religion, you got to take a bunch of different classes that are all about just going to become a well-rounded person, right? And these are $2,000 a pop. But time passes, she gets through her 2 years, she's a little disappointed that she hasn't taken a single programming class yet. Finally, junior year, she gets to take courses in her major. What computer class is she going to take? Math, naturally. She's going to take discrete math. She's never had to do any math to make websites before, but she does now, apparently, because they keep telling her computers are all about math. And so she throws herself into math. She's a good student. She knows how to figure out math, so she can figure out proof by induction and big O notation and all those things that you have to do in special math classes that they only make the computer science people and the math students take. And after doing quite well in those courses, she's able to finally, the end of her junior year, take her first programming class. Well, what's it going to be? Is it going to be something she can use to make those mobile apps, to make those websites that she's been doing? Maybe she's going to learn some JavaScript. She's fiddled with it already on websites. She's going to use something practical and in demand in industry. She's going to learn C. Right? She's going to start taking classes where she has to do sorting algorithms, so she learns selection sort and bubble sort and merge sort, and then she learns quick sort, which she doesn't know why she didn't learn that first. It's quicker than all the others. It's right there in the title. She learns how to make a linked list, and when she wants to know how to make it go backwards, she learns how to make a doubly linked list. Later, she learns programming in Common Lisp. She learns how to write assembler, but not on like an Intel machine or an AMD machine or one of the chips that we actually use today. She learns MIPS assembler, which is for machines that don't actually exist and are only for educational purposes. This is the practical education that her computer science professors promised her when she signed up. Well, after a year and a half to 2 years of this, she's a great student, right? She's graduated with honors, and she's trying really hard. She wants to do this, and it's time for her first job interviews. So Jane goes on her first job interview, and she's really excited because, like, the company said they were really cool, and they were agile, and they were all the great buzzwords that they're supposed to be. So she's really excited and goes to her first interview, ready to tell them how much she loves programming. And the interviewer asks her, so what can you tell me about loading classes in the Java class path? And she says, I've never done any Java. And then, okay, fine. We're looking for web developers. Have you done any Python? No, but I wrote a CGI script once in Perl. Does that help? Interview after interview goes this way. She just hasn't learned the exact skills that the interviewers are looking for her. Finally, one day, she is at an interview, and the interviewer is kind of a jerk and just throws up his hands and says, these universities don't produce programmers at all. She's despondent. A couple of months have gone by. She's now realized that after 6 months, you're expected to start paying off those student loans, and those are going to be $600 a month, and she lives at her parents' and is working part-time at Starbucks, and that's not going to make it. She starts looking around more and more to find out how to get the skills she's missing at the job interviews. She's not dumb. She's gone online. She started learning some of these languages, but she can't really put it on a resume. She can't prove it at the job interview. The interviewer says, well, you just downloaded and installed it. You didn't actually know how to program in this language. So finally, she starts finding things online about boot camps and camp boots and learn how to program in 12 weeks and in 8 weeks and in 45 minutes you'll be a computer programmer making $127,000 a year. These sound really exciting to her. She wants to learn how to make web apps. That's why she went to school in the first place, right? So she goes up to her parents. She steals up her courage. Says, Mom, Dad, I really want to do one of these web dev boot camps because I want to learn how to program, and the university didn't cut it. Can I have $12,000, please? After they get up off the floor, they decide that, well, we could go to Europe or we can get our child out of the house. They choose to get their child out of the house, but they're less than thrilled. And while owing money back to student loans may be expensive, owing money back to your parents is terrible. So she throws herself into the boot camp. She's really good at this because this is what she thought school would be. She's coding every single day. She's written a blog. She's written a to-do list. She's learned Angular. She's learned JavaScript. She's learned a lot of Angular because it's an Angular 4 boot camp. She's got all the stuff ready to go. She is an Angular 4 programmer when she comes out after 12 weeks. Where's that $120,000 a year job that she's going to get? Well, her first interview at the same place she went to the first time asks, so do you know React? She goes to the next one, do you know Vue.js? Gets the next one, they're looking for Angular programmers, right? Okay, do you know Angular 5? No, I know Angular 4. This again repeats itself until finally desperation meets desperation, and a place that really needs a JavaScript programmer hires her. Jane's ecstatic. Her parents are ecstatic. They may see that money again someday. So she's hired on as an entry-level programmer at a JavaScript shop. And after filling out all her forms that she's supposed to do the first day, she comes in on the second day ready to program. Her boss comes over, leads her over to where her cubicle is, sits her down, and says, look, I know I'm supposed to mentor you and get you up to speed on all this stuff, but there's 2 production issues, and I've got 17 meetings today, and the iteration ends in an hour. So can you just clone the repository and start looking around at the code and see what it looks like? And she says, sure, but, and as he runs off, can you tell me what clone means? Right? She spends most of the rest of the day figuring out what the heck Git is, what GitHub is, where her user account is, and how to find it. And embarrassingly, at the end of the day, manages to clone the repository. And she types npm install. She did learn that from her bootcamp, right? And it breaks and crashes and doesn't work on the first try, because this has never worked on the first try for any programmer in human history. If it works for you on the first try, please write it down and let someone know. We'll celebrate together. Party at my house, right? So finally, she's got the job, but she doesn't know what to do with it. And she's worked around in the repository a little. She's got it up and running. She's seen the app. It's Friday. And she goes over to her boss and says, I looked around at the repo. What do you want me to do? And she says, you haven't started your Jira ticket yet? You were supposed to finish an hour ago. What's Jira? So a couple of weeks go by. She's finished off her ticket, and she submits her first pull request. It's 4 lines. She submits it to her team, who barely talked to her. They're all very, very busy. 4 lines, so does she get 2 comments? No, she gets 64. Each one more condescending than the previous one. Finally, there are comments like, do you even know how to program? And this isn't idiomatic JavaScript. And are you dumb? Which really should be a reason to get somebody in trouble, but it's not, because this industry has some issues with how they treat people. So after going back and forth in the PR, she manages to get it submitted. It goes into production. It's shipped. And what does it do that day? Of course, it crashes big time, falls down, and now Jane is a programmer because she has broken production. Congratulations, Jane. So this story, especially for many of you, may sound at least somewhat familiar, bits and pieces of it somewhere, and that's not because Jane, the person I made up, was particularly dumb. No, she was smart. It's because our education system for computer science, it's kind of broken. Right? And I say computer science, what I really mean is computer programming. We're not great at teaching programmers to be kind. CS degrees are not useful. So if you have a CS degree, I'm not telling you should sue your university and ask for your money back. Although if that works, please tell me that too. Right? But what a CS degree is good at is producing other academics. And as an industry, we've complained about this forever. I could go back to probably the 70s and find people complaining that universities don't produce programmers. And the problem is we're asking the wrong question as an industry. Universities aren't supposed to produce programmers. If you go to CS programs, yes, if you go to their website, they'll say they produce practical skills for programming. And they try really hard, but they're using mostly academics to try to produce practical programmers, and it's just not a good fit. And frankly, it shouldn't be. Because much of what we call the state-of-the-art in this industry is something that people wrote in papers 40 years ago in a university, and someone now just remembered to read and discovered their computer can actually run it. It's not something that is actually new. We're all doing stuff that people like Alan Kay and Bjarne Stroustrup wrote in the 70s. And that's what universities are really good at. If you want to be an academic, a researcher, a teacher, a university is probably where it's at. And so we've replaced this with boot camps. But boot camps are on a time crunch, and they're in competitive industry. So they can't say this is going to take years. They need to say weeks. They're scaled down. A lot of 8 Light's best apprentices have a mixture of these 2 backgrounds because you do learn a lot in both places. So I picked on both of these things, but it doesn't mean either of them is necessarily bad. It's just we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? So I think we should be doing this differently. Let's imagine for a moment Jane gets herself a time machine. The DeLorean got up to 88 miles an hour. She's 18 again, right? She's now really excited about being a computer programmer. And she decides that's what she wants to be her trade for the rest of her life. So she applies immediately to apprenticeships. Now, this is software craftsmanship meetup. Many of you have probably at least heard of apprenticeships. 8 Light has an apprenticeship program, and I believe Def Method might, and a couple of other people out here might have apprenticeship programs. I'm not talking about the kind of apprenticeship programs that we run or that I've mentored. Those are usually 6 to 9 months long, maybe a little shorter, maybe a little longer. And I've never told anyone how to write an if statement. Those people come in with some basic knowledge of programming. They don't know what good programming is, they don't know what bad programming is yet, but they can kind of funnel their way through and solve problems. Well, this is high school grads, right? They've shown some affinity for the material. So when Jane goes to her parents this time, she says, I want to do an apprenticeship. They're a little iffy on it because they always wanted their kid to go to college. Every parent does. But they allow her to go for it. Okay, she signs up with the local apprenticeship organization for an apprenticeship and says, hey, how long is this going to take? 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? No, this is going to take a really long time before we're going to stop calling you an apprentice programmer. As an apprentice, you are not allowed to write a line of code that is not supervised by somebody else that has already completed an apprenticeship. You're probably looking at somewhere around 5 years. Okay, so are you willing to commit to that? Jane is super willing to commit to that. She can do basic math. She knows that a college degree takes 4 years. 5 years is only a little bit longer. So, yay, she's really excited. What do I do as an apprentice? Well, the first thing Jane's going to do is she is going to actually go to classroom. She's got classroom training. Most of it's going to be at night. Most nights, she's going to be heading to the local organization and taking classes. She's going to be learning about JavaScript, and she's going to be learning about web frameworks, and she's going to be learning about practical programming. Now, I've criticized universities for not teaching practical programming. The fact is that it's hard to keep up with the state of the art in this industry. We shift a lot. Her classes are probably going to be shorter than your typical classes in a university. They're not going to be 20 weeks long or 12 weeks long, but they're probably also going to be more subjects, a lot more things. She's going to be taking classes on some things that are fundamental. She's not going to completely throw out theory. She might actually write those sorting algorithms, but she's going to be learning a lot about web frameworks, some mobile frameworks. She's going to learn how to maintain a server. She's going to learn how to dig into database code. She's going to have to build things up soup to nuts. She's going to do the entire system so that she can become a full stack developer. She's going to not do 20 hours of this, 40 hours of this. She's got hundreds of hours to complete before her apprenticeship is complete, right? But this is a nice class, as Jane thinks. I got my day free to myself? No, Jane's put to work. Jane is going to be on her first day, well, her second day. Everybody fills out the paperwork the first day. There's really no getting around that. Jane's first day, she's going to be doing grunt work. Jane is not going to come in on the first day and be told, can you implement this feature? Jane will have a mentor, and her mentor is going to say something to her like, Jane, we need a bunch of computers plugged in. Can you manage that? Everything Jane does is going to be heavily supervised by her mentor. So initially, she's going to be doing things like install those Ubuntu servers, get that Jenkins box set up, all the little things that we as developers often don't have time to quite get right. She's got to fill in the quite get rights. About every system I've ever seen has duct tape and baling wire somewhere in the middle. She makes sure there's not duct tape and baling wire somewhere in the middle. It's her job to make sure everything's put together right and everything can be found and done easily at first. It's all the grunt work we don't want to do. Move stuff around. After 6 months, a year maybe, she starts writing little programs at work, supervised and a lot of pair programming with her mentor. Her mentor increasingly starts asking her questions like, what do you think about this? How should we do this? She's learned enough programming in class to start applying it to work so that she can actually be doing real programming, but heavily supervised. Over the course of time, she doesn't have to do that more and more, and we'll get to that. Why is Jane willing to put up with all this stuff? She's getting paid. Jane's not working for free. I'm not describing something like where occasionally we have internships, and if you've ever had an intern show up at a big company one day and just like the boss drops them off at your office and you're like, what do you want me to do? I don't know, can you straighten those wires? No, she's getting paid and she's provided real value. She's not a lot at first, right? She's not getting paid a lot. She's not providing a huge amount of value. Her salary goes up requisite with time spent on a job site like anyone else. And unlike what she's not doing, building up student debt. Time goes by. She's getting paid. She's getting raises like a regular employee. Her title is just apprentice programmer. She's tied to her mentor. That probably means they work in the same location, but her apprenticeship is tied to the organization, not to the company she works at. So if people move, there's ways to make that work around. Ultimately, her mentor is responsible for any work she does. So she's heavily supervised, but increasingly less so. Less so and less so. All pair programming eventually becomes we review all your code. You only do some automation around the stuff we do, becomes you do some bug fixing, becomes you do some features. By the end of her 5th year, she is an indispensable employee at wherever she's at because she's been there for 5 years. They're like, you're not done with your programming yet. You're not done with your apprenticeship yet? Because you sure seem to me like you're actually like one of our best employees. How can this be? Well, Jane's got to finish her project. Jane's got a big project to finish. So when she finishes that project, she can actually be considered a journeyman programmer. She can work alone provided it meets certain requirements. Now, this project is not just a big diagram like this. She needs to be able to produce the diagrams, the documentation. She needs to write the code. She needs to write the code probably in multiple languages. She needs to maintain the database. Maybe she needs to connect to some microservices because that's the hot new thing right now. She's got everything up in the cloud because if you don't put cloud on your resume, no one will hire you. So just put it up there. Like just write cloud somewhere and you'll be fine, okay? So she's done everything, and this is not a group project. There's no, I sit in the corner and let everyone else do the work. Okay, this is probably her entire last year of classroom training. And eventually, when she's ready, it goes to a review board. Right? These are a group of masters who have been with the organization for many, many years. They've completed all of this. They've done tons of hours in classroom. They're probably people that are teaching in said classroom. Some of them are individual mentors. They are very harsh graders, and they are not tied to her current employer. And that's one of the key differences from what I'm describing and what, say, 8th Light runs. Because this is not her path to employment at a particular company. This is her path to ending her apprenticeship. And what we don't want is a scenario where the apprenticeship is set up for what's best for the employer. We want it to be what's best for the industry, and those aren't always the same thing, right? Jane nervously plans it. She prepares it. She's got to produce an enormous amount. She's got like an 8-hour-long demo. If anyone here has a PhD and has done a PhD defense, this is what I imagine a PhD defense is like. I haven't done one, so I assume you're just covered in sweat and it's like 8 hours long and it's a lot of screaming and yelling at you and everyone ends up in tears and then they give you a diploma. So Jane is smart. She's capable. She's able to do this. She gets through and she does it. She is now what is called, for lack of a better, more gender-neutral term, a journeyman. She is able to work unsupervised. She is clearly, at this point, an indispensable employee. She is going to be the kind of person that anyone wants to hire. She's closer to what maybe we call a senior year at this point. But let's remember, she's 23 years old. She's been working at this for 5 years. And this is a title that now means something because we're talking about an organization that can actually do that kind of, I don't like the word certification, but I don't have a better one. The organization, when they say someone's a journeyman, it means something because they've done this in many locations all across the world. It's a respected organization. And so it's not the case where she's comparing senior engineer at one place where you've been there 1 year and senior engineer at another where you've been there 15. Interviewers no longer have to ask questions like, how do you manage the Java class path? How do you, do dumb trivia quizzes? Interviewers now already know a base set of skills because they probably went through it too, and they've seen multiple people come through this program, and this is one thing that I know 8th Light has had a lot of success with our apprenticeship program because the first time we're with a client, we usually have to go through interviewing, and then once we send a few developers, they kind of just stop because they know what they're getting. Now, complain about education, but Jane's also got another problem, right? She's a 5-year experienced programmer. If you don't think she's already been offered a job in management, you are mistaken. A lot of us programmers, we got into this because we want to be programmers. Now, some of us change our mind eventually. We want to move into management. I am not one of those people. Some people want to be computer programmers forever. They just want to build stuff. Certainly at 23 they do. So after several years, 4 or 5, she decides she wants to be one of those big mean judges. She's going to work to be a master crafter. And what does that mean? She's going back to school. Again at night. Again, practical stuff. You might now be calling some of this server administration. Maybe some of this is the latest and greatest things. But some of this is just learning the stuff that happened while she's been working. So we all know continuing education is important. But she's now got to go back to school. She's got to accrue more classroom hours. And as she does so, she will also eventually get a project. She will need to produce her masterpiece. She will have to come up with something that shows all her skills, much like her project before, but loads harder. Fortunately, she's loads smarter, so she can do this project a whole lot faster than she could the last time, except it's a lot bigger, so, the math ends up about the same. Now, she works hard, Jane produces her masterpiece. At this point, she's like, let's say 35 years old. She's worked in the industry for about 15 years. She's produced a masterpiece. She can bill practically whatever number she comes up with an hour. She can go to places when she applies and say, I'm a master crafter. She's in the 0.001% of software developers because most people don't complete this. And when she does so, they know she's not going to be one of their best developers. She's going to be the best developer in the place. She's going to be their team leads on day one. She's going to be designing all of their systems. She's going to be what we sometimes call a software architect role, but she's going to be hands-on. She's going to be doing stuff. He's going to be building things. Well, for Jane, time passes. Eventually, she's built all the coolest things in the world. She's gotten a little older now. She wants to move into a little bit more of a mentorship role. She doesn't really want to deal with deadlines and firefighting anymore. And while as the industry gets better at what we do, there will be less deadlines and firefighting, at least theoretically, she's finally decided it's time to just sort of maybe step back and do some of that research, become a little bit more of an academic. Now she decides, I'm going to go back to school, and she gets a university degree. The universities change their program now, though. They're not trying to produce practical software developers to get jobs in industry. They're trying to produce academics that are going to be writing papers that advance the state of the art. And it's a choice she's making. And it's a thing she can afford from all the wonderfully good salaries she's been getting over the last 20 years. No longer is she worried about getting a bunch of student loans. Bill comes and she writes a check. Eventually, after going through their programs, she does become an academic. She writes papers. She advances the state of the art. She writes a paper that's going to be the way her grandkids are programming someday. At this point, Jane's lived herself a pretty good programming life. She's never loaded up on any student debt. She's never had to beg her parents for money, which is always a win. They got to go to Europe, also a win. And she's gotten to do what she wanted to do for pretty much her entire career. Now, if you're paying close attention or you come from a background that's non-traditional, you may have recognized this career path because it's similar to the skilled tradesman. And again, we need a better gender-neutral term, but this is very similar to the path a master plumber would go through or a master electrician. And before you turn up your nose at being a master plumber, the next time your toilet breaks, you're not going to call a programmer, right? I know many of you probably would have gone to your parents and said, I want to go become a plumber, and they would have said, no, you do not. But the fact remains that they, as an industry, know how to build people in a trade. And that's essentially what I'm arguing today, is that we are not an academics pursuit. We're definitely not doing engineering. We are a skilled trade. And that's kind of right there in the title, Craftsman, right? This is the Software Craftsmanship Conference that comes from the idea of craftsmanship of old, where it's a trade. Now, craftsmanship of old, you might have been bound to a master when you were 12 years old by your parents. I'm not advocating that, yet, unless my 12-year-olds really misbehave. But in general, this is what we're inspired by. And this is what electricians and plumbers are also inspired by. And it's a lot closer to what we do day to day. So how do we get from where we're at now to there? And that is kind of the key question, right? Because I've said organization several times, but I haven't said what. Well, as a start, we need a lot more apprenticeships because we do need to learn a lot more about what apprenticeship is like. 8th Light has a good model for 8th Light employees. That does not mean it's a good model for everyone or even most people. And you can see the little headline there from our website where it says apprenticeships are the path to employment at 8th Light. Well, we need apprenticeship programs that are not a path to employment to any particular organization. They are a path to employment, period, end of sentence. They are meaningful. That means we need a lot more apprenticeship programs in general so we can begin experimenting about what works and what doesn't. We need to learn. And to do that, we need to talk to each other a lot more. Here we are in a software craftsmanship conference with a community, but our apprenticeship programs don't talk to each other all that much. Or if they do, nobody told me, right? We need to be communicating so that we're working on a similar path. Unfortunately, in some ways, we're going to need some degree of standards. As an industry, we use the phrase best practices a lot. And we have no two people that can agree on what best practices are. We've had people at this conference say that if you don't do TDD, you're an unprofessional. And I've usually answered that, but they're getting paid, so they're clearly a professional. They're not maintaining their amateur status for the Olympics. This is one particular practice that I happen to practice a great deal that a lot of you don't, and that's okay, because we haven't actually settled that debate. We haven't settled the debates on lots of things. What does good software architecture look like? What is clean code? What we have are anecdotes masquerading as data. We talk to each other a lot and say, this is good, but we don't actually settle these discussions. And it's occurred to me recently, because I'm middle-aged and therefore trying to get back into shape by law, and that we are, as an industry, a lot closer to the fitness industry than we are engineering or any other discipline. And by that I mean we jump from fad to fad faster than you can shake a stick at it, right? One day it's everyone needs to do Agile, the next day it's everyone needs to do DevOps. It's one thing to the next, one thing to the next. There's a lot of, just pay for my program at 2 a.m. and you'll ship code to production faster than anyone else in the world. We don't have great standards, and I'm, not exempting myself. The whole world needs it, and I think that's part of the reason these apprenticeship programs need to start talking to each other, because we need to really determine what actually works well. We need more continuing education. My picture's over the logo. But I am the head instructor at the Weyrich Software Institute, which is 8th Light's master's level code academy. We take people that have spent a year or two in the industry, sometimes longer if they want to come back, and we start training them on a lot of the latest techniques. We're trying to get people from the junior developer to the senior developer quickly. We're trying to accelerate the 1 to 5 year growth plan. I sometimes call the curriculum, here's the mistakes I make so you don't make them, right? We want to get people to that level much faster, and so we're trying to do that in our own way. Other organizations also need to make that attempt. There needs to be a lot more of this. It's somewhat comparable to a master's degree, but frankly, I have a master's degree, and I can tell you it's taught by academics. So those people aren't practicing in the industry, most of them, there are exceptions, day to day. We need more people like that. And so when I talk about this organization, I'm probably talking about something similar to a guild. I haven't said the U word because this is New York City, but also we get paid way too much to need that, and my boss is sitting over there, and if I start accidentally creating a union, I don't want to get fired. So, but it needs to be a professional organization that can help build this kind of thing out. Maybe it's one of the ones we already have. Do we have many members of the Association for Computing Machinery here, or IEEE? Maybe that's where it needs to be, because we have here a community that is essentially the beginnings of such an organization. And really, ultimately, it's up to us. We have a bunch of people here using the fancy schmancy title of software crafter or craftsman or whatever you want to call it as a community. And we have tons of meetups, and that's great. But we spend a lot of time showing off to each other and gazing at our navels. We can do a lot better at getting out to the world. We need to be more than just a bunch of programmers with an inferiority complex. We need to actually build something, build a real organization that provides more than just a place to hang out and talk. All right, so that's me. I'm Eric Smith, in case you forgot my name. If you want to yell at me on Twitter, I'm Peyton Rules. I'm pretty much Peyton Rules anywhere you can find me. I've got a couple of links for the Weyrich Institute and 8thlight.com up there. And if you want to see me really get going, it's at peytonrules.com. But thank you. Is there Q&A time? I don't know. You got the sign. I apparently got 5 minutes for Q&A. My timer says I'm longer than yours does. All right. You guys still too early in the morning? Oh, we do have a question. Cool. Yeah.
So I work for a company that participates in co-op programs with various universities.
Perfect.
I'm just curious about your opinion on co-op programs. Where you take students for 6 to 8 months. It feels like kind of middle ground with what you're talking about.
So I heard the first half. I'm not sure everyone did over the mic. So you said you're working for a company that's doing co-op programs that partners with the university. Yeah, so I do think that's a middle ground from what I'm talking about. This talk evolved because that was sort of my original notion. And I just think it's bigger than that, but I think that's a great way to start, especially helping students, because I glossed over it, but university education provides a lot of things that are not related to programming, right? We don't have a great way to teach some of those things outside of university, which is an awful expensive way to learn things like how to write a cover letter, but yeah, I think it's a great idea. Oh, good. Guys, can you guys make a Jerome run as far as you can? The next question needs to be from Jeff. Yes, can we get that?
I have a question. You have a very negative view of education in universities. Today, in order for, I do agree with some of the points you made about craftsmanship, but it is not, a liberal art education is really critical to a computer scientist, because you need to think through a problem, and you have to have not just trade as part of your skill set, but also design, and you have to bring various facets of your education into the job. So I disagree strongly with your perspective. Thank you.
Okay, so that's fair, and I will say I don't actually have a negative opinion of university. Otherwise, I wouldn't owe the school quite so much. I will say I never learned a thing about design of software in university, not for 1 second. And that partly depends on the program, very much. And I offhandedly mentioned it. Most of what I got, the best work I got out of university, were probably from some of the liberal arts bits. I do think universities could probably do a better job of making sure the liberal arts parts are a little more guided, but that's harder for some 18-year-olds than others. So, and the other thing I would say is my opinion isn't quite as much about the universities per se as I do think industry has pushed them into a box that isn't necessarily a fair spot for them to be in. Which is a long way of saying I probably don't think we disagree as much as you think we do. Oh, we got a couple.
Got a question right here.
Oh.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
What is you gave the path for the developer. What would be the path for the mentor? Because it seems like in your model, you'd almost have to have like a 1-to-1 ratio of mentor to developer. I was curious about the mentor path in your model.
Oh, that's a really good question. So in my model, you start mentoring generally after you've completed an apprenticeship, and it's not necessarily a 1-to-1 relationship. You're right, because that becomes a problem of scaling. My sort of ideal idea would be that you have a master who has several journeymen under them who also then mentor apprentices. But so it's kind of a triangle, right? So a master might have a couple journeymen, and a couple journeymen are mentoring a couple apprentices themselves. And I know in APLET's apprenticeship program, the apprentices tend to learn a lot from each other. That's, said. I haven't worked out all the kinks yet.
I agree with your frustration about our industry being guided by fads. Do you know if anybody is trying to collect more data about how we should make decisions, like what language to use or what framework is better for a certain problem?
Yeah, so I would say that's probably something that universities are better at than we are in industry. I think that the research aspect of it is something that universities they're really good at. If you guys are currently using Google's model for channels, this is communicating sequential processes that was written about in the 70s, right? As for getting the data, there is data out there on a lot of different practices. There's not nearly enough. And in that way, it also reminds me of the fitness industry, where people do a study of 12 people and say, oh, okay, this process works. I'm just like, you don't know squat. That's 12 people. It's not big enough. Thanks.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. But great job, Eric.